Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the identity of the New Testament text, written by W.N. Pickering, published in 2014. We're going to wrap up chapter 5, pages 115 to 128, on the history of the text, and we will look at the historical evidence, we will look at deviation from text transmission, and we will look at the false notion that the oldest text is the best. Let's go to block 1. And under the historical evidence and under statistics, the majority text represents 95% of the manuscripts, and the remaining 5% do not represent any single text form. They disagree among themselves. Therefore, majority versus minority text. The actual ratio is more like 98% to 1% in favor of the majority text. Hort's notion of a Lucianic revision has been abandoned by scholars today because it lacks any historical evidence. So under historical evidence, no historical bridge can be constructed between the Textus Receptus and Sinaiticus and Codex B. The majority text has a common archetype. Hort posited the common source as the Lucianic revision, but scholars today recognize that the common source goes back to the 2nd century, and it is the autographs. The eclectic editions of the New Testament Greek are based on an aberrant form of the text. Let's take a look at block 2, deviation from text transmission. Holland posited that the Byzantine text was a secondary development that contaminated the pure Alexandrian text. But the Alexandrian text happened to be in disagreement among themselves. There is disagreement among Alexandrian text. They do not reflect any single tradition. In actuality, it is the Byzantine text that is the oldest, and the Alexandrian text is a corruption of the main transmission stream. Corruptions of the main transmission stream. Each Alexandrian text has a different mosaic. The Byzantine archetype reflects the original autograph. There is a 98% level of agreement between the Byzantine text. Holland admits that down through the centuries, the Byzantine text was regarded as the text of the church. Asia Minor started out with most of the autographs. Even by 325 AD, Asia Minor continued to be the heartland of the church. You can see that Pickering is reversing the opinion of the Hort Revision Committee. It is the Alexandrian text that has corrupted the primacy of the Byzantine text, not the other way around. And that brings us to block 3 and the false notion that the oldest is the best. Is the oldest the best? The more ancient witness is usually preferred. Best attestation is assumed to be the oldest witnesses. It is assumed that they are closest to the original. Closest to the original. There has been discovery of papyri separated from the originals by only 2 centuries, and most significant variants had come into being by 200 AD. Therefore, to favor the oldest is a false notion. Favor toward the oldest. There were deliberately altered texts as early as the 2nd century. Therefore, each witness must be evaluated on its own, evaluated within the history of manuscript tradition. It all boils down to the history of manuscript tradition. Our earliest manuscripts are Alexandrian. They consist of the Bede papyri, the Bodmer papyri, Sinaiticus, and Vaticanus B. But Pickering asks the key question, is it wise to follow the witness of one location? Should we narrow our foundational theory on one location, namely Alexandrian texts, which reflect Gnostic influence? Certainly we must consider the Byzantine text to be the best and the most reliable, says Pickering, and we should not automatically default to the Alexandrian text, which never agree with themselves and which are not close to the autographs. According to Pickering, it is the Byzantine texts that are close to the autographs. And the Byzantine texts are not based on a Lucianic revision, as Hort proposed. They are based on the autographs. Most autographs were in Asia Minor. The Byzantine text was primary, not secondary. And the Alexandrian text contaminated the Byzantine text, not the other way around. And also, we have to consider that in sheer volume, the critical text, the Greek critical text today, is based on Bede Papyri, Bodmer Papyri, Sinaiticus, and Vaticanus B. Primarily, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B. Very few documents compared to the thousands of majority text documents. Thousands of manuscripts provide a foundation for the majority Textus Receptus. The critical text is based on primarily Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So this wraps up chapter 5, which really gives us an accurate conclusion to the positive content offered by Pickering. Remember, chapter 4 was a reactionary chapter. Chapter 5 has been positive critical content. It's been a very good, chapter 5 has been a superb chapter. In this particular closing section, if you look at block 1, note 3, a key point, 3a, there is no historical bridge that can be constructed between the Textus Receptus and Sinaiticus or Codex B. And the majority text has a common archetype. It is not Hort's Lucianic revision. It is the autographs. And then in block 2, note 3, the Byzantine archetype reflects the original autographs. There is a 98% level of agreement between Byzantine texts. And Olland of the United Bible Society admits that down through the centuries, the Byzantine text was regarded the text of the church. Asia Minor started out with most of the autographs. Even by 325 AD, Asia Minor continued to be the heartland of the church. And then that took us to block 3, and a key point in block 3 is 3 note 4, the history of manuscript tradition. Our earliest manuscripts are Alexandrian, but they are few. They are simply the Bede Papyri, the Bodmer Papyri, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B. And primarily, the critical theory of Hort relies on Sinaiticus and Vaticanus B. But even more importantly, why narrow our automatic default to Alexandrian text? Should we really follow the witness of one location only and ignore the majority text? And Pickering in chapter 5 has shown us that the Textus Receptus should be preferred. And so it's a great conclusion, a very powerful conclusion, I think. to Chapter 5. It's positive critical content provided by Pickering, not simply reactionary content, but positive critical content. We had a chance to close out with a historical evidence. We do see that there was deviation from the transmission stream, and the Alexandrian manuscripts in Block 3, they disagree with each other, and they are few. The Bede Papyri, the Bodmer Papyri, Codex Sinaiticus, and Codex Vaticanus B. Tischendorf's Codex Sinaiticus and Cardinal Mai and his Codex Vaticanus B. Remember, Tischendorf and Cardinal Mai were friends, and the Jesuits were able to persuade Tischendorf to take up the Catholic point of view, and so Sinaiticus is very much slanted toward the Catholic view in conjunction with Vaticanus B. So that's questionable in itself. But Chapter 5 has been very good, positive, critical content, the entire chapter. Actually, Block 3 picked up just a couple pages of Chapter 6. Our next lesson is going to be in Chapter 6, but Block 3 here does pick up just the first couple pages of Chapter 6. But we will fully approach Chapter 6, which will also be done in 3 parts. We'll begin with our next lesson with 6a, but this is going to wrap up 5c on the history of the text and really bring home the concluding remark from Pickering that the Byzantine text was not a secondary development, that the Byzantine text was a primary text, a text that deserves primacy, a text that should be the actual default text, not the Alexandrian. And the Alexandrian has contaminated the Byzantine, not the other way around. Very critical conclusion. And the Alexandrian texts can't even agree between themselves. They're in a disagreement with each other. And even Holland of the United Bible Society affirms that the Byzantine text was regarded the text of the church. So very positive, critical content, and that's going to wrap up 5c, and it's going to touch on just a few pages of Chapter 6, but in our next lesson we will take a look at Chapter 6a. We'll handle that chapter in 3 parts also. But that'll wrap up the conclusion to Chapter 5 and the history of the text.